Multilinguals, what's your... They didn't realize I could understand their language. Story. I live in England but I come from Poland and am fluent in Polish alongside English. Couple of days ago I was ordering at a Subway when two Polish employees started talking. It went something along the lines of "this fat wants chicken and bacon," and they laughed. On a side note, I feel like that's not that uncommon of an order, right? When it got to putting vegetables on the sub, I gave my order fully in Polish with a big smile on my face. The order cost me £4.80, but the looks on their faces were priceless. I was solo traveling in Morocco. I'm 22, female, and speak Arabic enough to understand conversations, basic words and phrases, etc. I was trying on clothes at a small shop and there were two women helping me choose what to try on. They started talking about me in Arabic, saying how I would be a great wife for one of the ladies' sons. They were going on, and as I was leaving I responded in Arabic, "No thank you, but I appreciate your help," and they were stunned. I'm a black American. My dad was military and stationed in Korea from his late teens to mid-20s. He picked up on the language, and as a child he taught me. It was like our secret language to talk around my mum with. She hated it. Anyway, I went to college with a large Asian population. While me and some friends were in a study room, a group of students came and I asked us to leave so they could use the room. In English, there was no time limit, no sign up, no nothing where they had that right. So I explained that we were here first, why do they want this particular room? Then they start speaking Korean and say something along the lines of, "Ugh, of course the black is being difficult, they've been here for a while, they need to leave. Maybe we can lie and say the professor reserved it." I respond in Korean, "Call Bia" in English, "so I can punch you," and everyone in this room knows why. Their faces turned bright red. They couldn't say anything, they just looked at me in shock and then left the room. Was a high school student in Toronto, but I speak Slovak, which is similar to Czech and Polish. I was going to school on the subway in the morning and two good-looking women started to talk in Polish right next to me. I usually like to strike up conversations with fellow Central Eastern Europeans. Unfortunately, they started talking about how one of them has had a burning pee problem, with nowhere to move on the packed subway and no headphones. It was an awkward thing for a 15-year-old to hear from two ladies. It got a little worse later when they started to talk about women problems. Now I have no issues with that convo nowadays, of course. But 15-year-old virgin me was a bit mortified. A long 45 minutes. Edit. Word. When I was doing my exchange studies in China, native Russian, I was riding a subway in Shanghai. At one of the stops a mother and her daughter sat beside me. The daughter was maybe 4 or 5 and she wouldn't stop looking at me. Then without turning her head she started asking her mum, "Mommy, why is Mr. so strange? Why is his hair strange?" And so on. I didn't react as if I didn't speak Chinese. And the mother patiently told her daughter, "Mr. isn't strange. He's just a foreigner. They look different." I thought it was really sweet, so I started talking to both of them in Chinese. They were very nice and I hope they're doing great now. Not me, but my dad, very white guy with equally white Irish last name, was born and raised in India. He speaks a variety of languages: Gujarati, Hindi, Konkani, English, Portuguese, etc. He was at an airport and sitting across from two young Indian women. One was saying to the other in Hindi, "Look at that fat old white guy over there." My dad got up, walked over to them and greeted them in Hindi, proceeding to make small talk about their flights and days. From his telling, there was a mix of shock and absolute embarrassment coming from them. He smiled and walked back to his baggage. My dad grew up in Egypt and now travels the world for Dole, the fruit company. Once he was in Morocco at a plant who were possible suppliers and they tried to deceive him. They showed him the safety guidelines that were written in Arabic, but were describing different standards in English. My dad doesn't look like a typical Middle Easterner and has a very nondescript accent. So they thought they could fleece him. After the dude was done talk, my dad says, "That's not what it says," and the guy says, "What do you mean?" My dad repeats the statement but in Arabic. The guy apparently dropped his jaw and all he could say was, "You speak Arabic?" Needless to say that Moroccan plant did not get the gig. Well, my great aunt told a story of how she once went into a butcher shop. When she walked in, the butcher was talking with a customer in Russian, which she spoke. The butcher saw my great-aunt walk in and told the costumer, in Russian, that he'd take care of this old hag, and then continue the conversation, so my great-aunt, in English, asked for pounds and pounds of cold cuts, all sliced and wrapped. When it was all ready, she told him, in Russian, to shove it up your, and walked out. God, I loved that woman. Deleted. My late best friend, who was big, tall and blonde, was in Tim Hortons. He speaks fairly fluent Arabic, having spent 7 years working in Saudi Arabia. 3 Arabic men were sitting at a table making very lewd comments about the women in the shop. My buddy turned to them and said in Arabic, "You need to shut up before someone kicks your dot. You never know who's listening." They got very confused, and left soon after. I was on the subway in NYC a few months ago when a family sitting across from me was playing I Spy in Hebrew with their kids. The parents went around describing each person they saw on the train. So when they got to me, I decided to play along. I looked up from my book, made a funny face, and covered my face with the book before the kids could find me. The parents started laughing and said to their kids, "I spy someone who understands us." The parents and I shared a good laugh about it while their kids got really excited that someone else spoke Hebrew. They never figured out who it was, but it made my commute a lot more fun. I was in the line to renew my license at the DMV. 2 Latina girls were behind me and were talking about me having pretty blue eyes in Spanish. They turned 3 shades of red when I turned around and said thank you. Moved to Thailand and took extensive language training. Was drinking coffee in a quiet shop and the barista and the waitress started guessing my age, where I was from, why I came there 3 days in a row, lived close by. And I was thinking, cool. They think I'm cute. How flattering. And then the barista said, but he's a little fat. So when I left, I told her my age and hometown. When she brought the change back, I told her that yes, I'm a little fat. My so is a tattoo artist who can speak Bulgarian, Turkish, English and German. One day we were queuing in the supermarket and 2 guys behind us were laughing and snickering. She turned around and said something to them. Afterwards she was laughing while one of the guys went bright red. Afterwards I asked her what that was about. The guys were like, "Look at her arm. Those tattoos. Disgusting. How can you tattoo a naked woman on yourself?" In Turkish. My so turned around and said, "Thanks bro." Sank first. The guy asked her to repeat because he didn't even register that she could be speaking Turkish and he misheard English. That's when she said, "For the tattoo opinion." It was funny from there. The guy apologized and said he has never felt so much shame in his life. His friend was saying at least buy them, my so and some beers. This was in a small town outside of Dublin City, so I can understand why they didn't think there would be any Turkish speakers around. Deleted. I've said this before. It happened a while ago. I went to a psychiatric emergency ward once and asked for help and if they were comfortable to speak English. I understand Danish but have a hard time making myself understandable in it and didn't really feel like an idiot at a crucial time of my life. I stayed there for 4 days without anyone realizing I knew what they were saying about me right in front of me. Point 2 of the nurses thought I was cute. Point 1 doctor thought I was lying all the time. A patient thought I was a spy for the staff. A lot happened in those 4 days. It made my stay way more enjoyable than it should have been. Not me, but my dad. We're from South Africa. My dad speaks 5 English, Afrikaans, similar to Dutch, French, Italian, and German. He emigrated to the UK in early 1995 when a lot of other South Africans were doing the same due to embedded racism of a fledgling nation. But I digress. He was on the underground in London when he overheard 2 guys speaking about her pretty woman on the train in Afrikaans, my dad's native tongue. According to Dad, they were being incredibly rude and using quite graphic descriptions of what they wanted to do to her. My dad decided to speak up and told them to off and to not speak to people that way. They don't know who is listening. The 2 guys looked horror-struck and shut up immediately. The lady turned to my dad at her stop and said, in fluent Afrikaans, "I bet they couldn't do half those things with their tiny s." My dad just laughed in shock and watched her get off the train. Pretty hilarious. Edited. Bad grammar. I've posted this before but I'll post it again. My husband is the bilingual one, not me. He's from Colombia so he speaks Spanish fluently, but grew up in the US and has been here most of his life. He also has a really fair complexion. Most people think he's just Caucasian. Anyway, we were in Cabo San Lucas, Mexico looking for a place to eat. We get to a restaurant and he asks in English how much it would cost for all-you-can-eat tacos. The guy at the door said it's $15. His friend next to him said to the guy in Spanish, "I thought it's $12. And the first guy responded, "Yeah, but they don't know that." My husband of course understood everything. He told them in Spanish that they're lying rip-offs and we'd be going somewhere else. The guy's expression was priceless. I'm an extremely white American man. I was stationed in Korea, and a buddy and I went into a store that was slightly off the beaten path. My buddy was in a different section of the store and found something he liked. He asked the shopkeep how much it was. The shopkeep said, in Korean, "Well, you're an American, so $65. Translation and currency exchange provided for ease of reference. I looked over and saw a sign on the wall that said the exact item he wanted was $40. I approached the shopkeep and asked him, in Korean, how much it cost, to which he replied $40. So I responded, in Korean, "Why are you charging him $65? Quote, he got rather embarrassed and apologetic, offered to sell the item for $35, and gave us each a soft drink for free. I lived in Riga for a short while and went out almost every Friday to meet girls. Riga has a lot of visitors from UK and I've spent a chunk of my time in US. So I generally speak English in the center. I feel more comfortable using it. However, I also speak Russian perfectly well. So I'm drinking a beer in a bar and all of a sudden some cute Russian girl comes up to me and starts speaking English to me. She invited me for a beer with her and her friend. I didn't really have anything else going for me that night, so I agreed. What followed is an hour of them trying to make me buy them a Dom Perignon bottle and some really dirty talking about what one of them would do to me if I agreed. They also talked to the bartender, who knows me fairly well, how they're gonna rip me off big time and that I'm a foreign idiot. I ended up buying them 4 beers. Total out of decency. It was a lot of fun for a while, I'll give them that. Eventually I got really tired of it all, plus my friend hit me up. So I just switched to Russian, thanked him for a nice evening and left. Their faces were red from embarrassment and anger. Oh well. Don't scam people. Edit. Thank you for the kind gold and silver strangers smiley face. My neighbors went on holiday with her sister's family in Spain. The sister can speak fluent Spanish, they're Irish. Apparently a tour guide in Spain started talking about them, referring to them as those English sluts. They were never ones to let anything slide, so an argument broke out very quickly. Edit. Woke up this morning to 2 direct messages asking me to call a number to join the Illuminate. Guess this is what fame is like. Boy's face with tears of joy, smiling face with sunglasses. Oh, the cooks at my job still don't know I'm fluent in Spanish, lol. Yes, I know everything you're saying. Alejo. My dad from Tennessee knows Chinese and goes to China often for work, etc. One time he was driving and hit a bird, getting it stuck in the front of his truck. A Chinese man saw the bird and says to his friend, in Chinese, "He drove too fast," to which my dad says, "No, he flew too slow." Edit. Grammar. First gold. Thank you, kind stranger. I live in Austria, but my dad is from Brazil. All my Austrian aunts and uncles married a Brazilian. My grandparents from my mother's side opened and laid a factory of our family company in Brazil. That's why everyone was there. But some eventually came back to Austria. Just like my mum with my dad. Me and my siblings were raised multilingual but lived most of our life in Austria, so once when I was around 10 my mum and me were on a tram in Vienna with my little brother, who was around 2 at the time, in a stroller, and he starts crying really loudly. Then one Brazilian lady starts speaking really loudly and in an obnoxious tone something in the lines of, "Well, these European folks don't know how to treat their children with love. How can someone be so cold and unaffectionate to a child as to let them scream without taking them out of the stroller and holding them?" Quote, "We were standing by the way. There was no seat big enough at the time where we could leave the stroller. Sue, I was getting worried we were doing something wrong. I wanted to comfort. Inverse. A long time ago, my brother had a habit of making remarks about people in Spanish whenever he got annoyed, frustrated, or just wanted to make fun of someone. Kinda like a gossiping schoolgirl. I told him it wasn't cool. Not because he shouldn't be talking Spanish in public, but that he shouldn't be using it in such an underhanded way, and #X200B. If he had a grievance that he needed to get off his chest, he should tell them in a language they're likely to understand where we live, English. He kept doing it anyway, and #X200B. One time, we were leaving a major retailer and the store greeter asked to see his receipt before he could exit with the bagged merchandise in the cart. He had a hard time finding where he put his receipt and he got frustrated, and #X200B. He switched to Spanish and said some variety of "this old," and the store greeter immediately called him out on it in Spanish. He was like a deer caught in the headlights. I was so happy she did it. He made a weak attempt at reasserting his right to be frustrated at the situation, but you could see he was very embarrassed at having been caught talking trash in Spanish. I love my brother, but I'm glad he stopped doing that soon after. Happened to my wife when she worked at McDonald's. She looks a little on the Asian side but is from Guatemala. Group of Spanish-speaking people pay at the drive-thru and try shortchanging her. Driver says, "ESA Maldi to China no safe conta, that damn Asian lady can't count." Wife takes the money and very politely says they are short in Spanish. Driver turns red while Pengas couldn't stop laughing. My wife is Indian and her family speaks Gujarati. I've spent many years trying to pick it up and have found it to be very difficult as there are no great resources that I am aware of to learn it. You just have to listen and try to guess the context. Anyway, over the years I've gotten pretty good. And when my wife's aunt was visiting from India, she went right into my wife about how much weight I'd gained and how bad my diet must be. I understood every word and stopped her about 2 minutes into her rant. Turns out it didn't stop her from continuing. I've posted this on other threads before but I think it fits here. I lived in Japan when I was little and retook Japanese in college so I didn't sound like a child when I spoke. To solidify my new language skills, I went to my hometown for about 6 weeks a summer in college. It was a small town so most people remembered me or my family. But some people I stayed with. 6 weeks. 11 families that at least wanted me to spend a night in their home. We're new to the area since we left 15 years or so earlier. One of these families had a high school aged son who wanted to borrow me for his high school's international festival. No problem. I'd go and let other high schoolers practice their English with me and do carnival games and stuff. However, the guy apparently did not get the message that I spoke Japanese and proceeded to introduce me to all his friends as his girlfriend. I let him have his moment for the night, without leading him on, but on the train ride back to his home, he was talking to his friend in Japanese and I joined in on the conversation. Also in Japanese, the embarrassment on his face was worth knowing. All his friends thought I was his girlfriend. This was during the Christmas season. I was walking with my friend to a local bar. There were a few Russians standing outside their home smoking and 1 or 2 had a drink in their hand. As we walk past, a gentleman says, "What are you looking at, handsome guys?" in Russian. It's meant to come off like, "What are you looking at?" I turn around and say, "I completely understand Russian." Suddenly they get cheerful. The gentleman gives me a hug, handshake. I was then offered a drink and cigarettes. It was hilarious, especially to my friend who didn't understand Russian. I'm Greek but study in Belgium. Greeks are notorious for talking about people loudly when abroad. The language is rare enough that most people, including myself, usually feel comfortable doing that. Only problem with that logic is, there are so many of us around the world. It's generally not a good idea, so I get on the tram one day and there's this woman, 30s, sitting across from me who says to her friend very loudly and in Greek, "What is that supposed to be? A boy or a girl?" Quote, context for non-Greeks. We have a third, neutral gender that we use for objects, animals, or when talking about someone in a very rude and derogatory way. That is what she used, and in a very mocking tone as well. So I very calmly validated my ticket, and as I was walking away I reply, also in Greek, "It's a girl, and it speaks Greek as well." Her face was hilarious. She just made a mortified sound and didn't utter another word until she got off a few stops later. I love this story, but it kind of terrifies me as well. I avoid talking about other people, but I do tend to have very personal conversations with my Greek friends in public places, confident that nobody understands, even after being myself proof that it's not very safe. Edit. Thanks for the silver, guys. To be fair to the people involved here, the odds of me understanding them were small. When I was in an Arabic-speaking country for a language immersion program, I and one of the other people attached to the group ended up in a business run by Chinese immigrants to this Middle Eastern country. Now, before I started studying Arabic, I took a few years of Chinese, and in fact my Arabic was worse than my Chinese. So I could barely talk to them in Arabic but could understand the discussion about how they just wanted us to buy our and get out that they had in Chinese. Awkward. My former in-laws speak Italian. I went into the marriage not knowing Italian, but I picked it up pretty well. My Mill had a bad habit of talking to her family in Italian while I was sitting right there. Every one of them spoke English, so it wasn't as if she had to speak it to be understood. I put up with it, and it became interesting to hear what she had to say about me to the family while I was there. I got out of the marriage due mostly to her son's treatment of me, but her actions didn't help. So one day she calls me. She is going on about me being a terrible wife and mother. So I remark, "You know, I actually understand Italian. I understood everything you said about me when you thought I didn't know." She went quiet and cut the call short. It was wonderful. I was in New York, and entered one of those electronic stores. I asked the price of an item in English. The guy at the counter turns to another guy who on a ladder stocking items and asks in Hebrew how much he should charge. I speak Hebrew, so I'm following their dialogue. The guy on the ladder looks at me and notices that I am following them with my eyes. Then he switches to Arabic. I don't speak Arabic. The counter guy tells me the price in English. I say, "Too expensive," in Hebrew and leave. *edit. No, it was not B&H. It was a generic electronic store that sells overpriced goods to foreign tourists that don't have time to shop around. I don't know if this is cool, but I live in India and I don't really look too much like the people in my home state. So people always assume I'm from another state or another country and don't really understand their language. Tamil. For those curious, despite it being my mother tongue since I was born there, here, the transport buses have a conductor dude from whom you buy a ticket. So I was traveling in one such bus and I was approached by the conductor to buy a ticket. Seeing me, he I didn't know Tamil and tried his best to ask me to purchase a ticket in what little English he knew. He could have just said ticket, and I would have got it. But instead he tried to form a sentence along the lines of ticket. You can have. I just smiled and told him that I'd like to buy a ticket for the place I was going to in regular Tamil with the appropriate slang. All of a sudden, he had this huge smile on his face and handed me the ticket. He then asked me where I'm from, in Tamil this time, to which I responded that I'm from this state. He did a double take, but then nodded happily and went on to the next panger. Not gonna lie, it felt pretty cool to me. Some workers at an airport restaurant were saying very inappropriate things about my sister in Spanish. The women were criticizing her appearance, arguing with the men, who were saying very inappropriate observations about what she was wearing and what they would do to her. I ordered in Spanish. Workers all went silent and looked stunned. I asked detailed questions about the food menu in Spanish, so that they understood I knew everything they were saying. I gave her my credit card, but she never swiped it, and a $40 airport meal was free. So at the end of the day it was a win. I must have been about 8 to 9, and we were returning from a vacation in Agra. We were traveling by train and there was this lovely family seated in front of us. They were British, I think. My mum was asleep and I was reading Champak, a kid's story magazine in India used to be very popular in the 90s. They were talking amongst themselves and suddenly one of the girls looked at me and said, "She's so adorable." So instead of doing the proper thing, i.e. say thank you. I blushed hard and pretended to go to sleep. If by chance you guys are reading this, thank you. That memory still brings a smile to my face. My husband grew up in multiple countries and, though his English is pretty heavily accented, it's a sort of unidentifiable hybrid of all the countries where he learned it in school. He didn't move to the US until he was in his late 20s. When we went for our wedding rings and in walks super white me and my very Latino looking then Finesse. It's a tiny little shop and the two proprietors begin to talk amongst themselves in Hebrew, one of my husband's first languages, about how much they should charge. The first says, it should be at least $650. The second says, tell him it will be $700 at least. Maybe $750. I can try that, my husband says, in Hebrew, but with a smile. I'll give you $500. They just froze, and everyone laughed and we went into a more open negotiation. We paid $600 and I think everyone was happy. And #X200B actually have a reverse story. I had to act as if I didn't speak a language. I was going back home after having studied for a while in Uppsala, Sweden, and during the time I spent there, I had the occasion to learn quite a lot of Swedish. Anyways, to go back home, I had to buy a train ticket to Arlanda Airport from Uppsala Central to get to my flight, which was really early in the morning, and I did so, but bought my ticket with the company SJ, Statens Järnvägar. However, the first train that arrived at the station and that was going to the airport was a Upplands Lokaltrafik, different company, train which I did not buy a ticket for. Worried that I would be late to the airport, I still took the train thinking that they almost never check the tickets, and thinking that my ticket might actually work for that company as well. Well, they did check that day. The controller asks me in Swedish to see the ticket. So I hand it to him and he looks at me and says in Swedish, wrong ticket. So I decide to do the dumb tourist and I pointed to my passport and said in bad French accent, sorry, I don't speak Swedish, and I explained that I thought this ticket was the right one to go to the airport. He immediately gave me my ticket back and said that it was okay, but to check next time to buy the right ticket with the right company, in English. So I got off without any fine or anything like that because I faked not being able to speak Swedish. I still feel bad about it today. If the controller that met me that day is reading this, I just want to say, takok forla. I'm Romanian and an architect, and in Western Europe a lot of construction workers come from Romania. So a few colleagues of mine invited me to this party on a construction site. In Germany we have a celebration once the structure stands, the Richtfest, asking me to basically eavesdrop on the Romanians to find out how work went and if they were about the architects or whatnot. Didn't hear anything negative from the Romanians all night, so as they were preparing to leave early, right after dinner, I bummed a cigarette off one of them. In Romanian, they were thrilled. Finally someone could translate between them and the other workers and planners, and they were so proud of their work and so happy to be able to communicate with everyone. So we all, architects, clients, workers, engineers, got hella drunk, smoked a million cigarettes and had the best time I've ever had on a construction site. My colleagues then reported that the work continued with a lot of new motivation the following day and good times were had by all. Edit. I'm also a chick, so there's an extra layer of positivity to this, as it can be really tough as a woman in the construction industry. Those guys made us all proud. Edit. Be excellent to each other and treat the people whose labor builds our world with respect. Less than 3. I'm gonna pay this tilde silvery tilde golden tilde platinumy positivity forward yo smiley face. I'm Irish and I'm studying in Spain at the moment. I was in a restaurant the other day with my friend and there was a group of 3 or 4 English guys beside us. My friend and I were speaking in French, so they must have we were French or didn't understand English. They started shouting about how my friend and I were and how I have better and she has a better. I think they were deliberately using a lot of slang in the hopes that even if we did speak English, we wouldn't know English slang. I do, because I have an English housemate. My friend doesn't speak much English, but I told her what they were saying and started loudly talking in English about how there are a lot of English speakers in this city and people should watch what they're saying because they never know who can understand them. They went completely silent and beetroot red. Fucking idiots. Why they would me that nobody in this city can speak English is beyond me. It's a university town with a high international population, so I wouldn't consider myself fluent in Spanish, but I do speak and understand enough to know when people are talking about me and the general topic. Had a read-up story happen a few weeks ago. So I was servicing an ATM in a rather sketchy neighborhood. While loading the machine, a school down the street must have just let out and a whole group of teenagers came in, all speaking Spanish, talking about teenager things. Well, a few of them noticed the $5,000 in fives I had in my hand and started loudly talking to his friend how that was the most money he's ever seen. Now I get this reaction a lot, so I was going to ignore the kid, but right after that his friend started talking about going home to get his dad's pistol to put two in the back of my head, steal the money, then use it to buy a bunch of weed and video games. Of course these kids don't think I understand them at all. White guy in a Hispanic neighborhood. Most don't think I understand their language in my experience. So I calmly lock everything up while they continue making plans to kill me and rob me. Finish with the machine, then turn to them with my hand resting on my gun and tell them in Spanish to go home and don't talk about murdering and robbing a person right in front of said person. It's quite rude and could possibly get them killed in the process. They nearly themselves, and I walked out of the store laughing about it. The other way around, Belgium in the USA during Halloween, some guy comes trick-or-treating at the restaurant we're sitting, a girl from our group, we were all 16 to 18, says in Dutch to us that he is cute. The guy's face turns from happy and flirty to pissed. He turns to the girl and shouts, "I'm not gay, Ewing." Yay, that's right, I understand German. And #X200B. And he's not cute anymore. And #X200B. Edit. To clarify, she said snel, which is actually fast in Dutch but used in West Flemish. I only speak one language but was training this guy on it till a few years ago, and there were two French girls chatting in French, and suddenly he got a huge smile and said merci to the girls. One burst out laughing and the other one turned bright red. Turned out she was talking about how hot she found him. My family is Italian. I don't speak the language but have a pretty good understanding after listening to my dad and nonna. Over the years, we went to Italy to visit family, and my great-aunt was talking about how she was so happy to meet us, and she asked her son if we could understand her, and when I said yes, she broke into a huge smile. And it gave me a hug. It was so sweet. Edit. Thanks for the silver. Edit. Thanks for the gold. I have found if I ever want to diffuse a situation with someone I me as a native Spanish speaker, I switch languages and ask if they want to speak Spanish. 9/10 times everyone's stress goes down and the other person is relieved that they can express themselves better in a more comfortable language, and I'll still understand. I am a Polish-speaking Mongolian, currently residing in London. Once I was in Kew Gardens enjoying a cuppa next to this lovely Polish couple. Obviously tourists planning their route through the garden. After a while I noticed the guy left his hoodie behind. So I tracked him down to one of the places they were discussing earlier and casually handed him his hoodie back, with, "I think this is yours," in fluent Polish. He was utterly flummoxed and just stood there with his mouth wide open for a minute or two. Forgot to thank me even. I love their expressions when that happens. Deleted. This is a well-known experience by every English speaker living in Germany. Me, fluently speaking German. Them. Hey, where do you come from, by the way? Me. Oh, just America. Them. Immediately switches to English. Whyyyyyyyyyy. At this point I should just tell them I'm from France. African American English speaker here. Married a Chinese woman who speaks Cantonese and Mandarin. However, we took a trip to Japan on our honeymoon. I speak fluent Japanese. She speaks none. Went to a restaurant in Roppongi. The waitress approached us and began her evening script of the menu, specials, drinks, etc. However, she was speaking directly to my wife. I guess thinking that since my wife was Asian and I was not, that she spoke the language. My wife was hella confused. When the waitress finished her speech with "What can I start you with today?" my wife had no reply. The waitress began to look confused and ashamed, as if she had done something wrong. It wasn't until I chimed in with my wife is Chinese. But I'd like to know what's on your wine menu tonight, please. That everyone had a good laugh, though both of them still had a confused, cautious look on their faces. And #X200B. I speak both German and Norwegian. While I lived in Berlin, I was once waiting for the city train and a group of young Swedish tourists were next to me and talked about their thoughts on Berlin. Since Norwegian and Swedish is fairly similar, I understood the whole conversation. They mainly talked about Nazi stuff and how Berlin was a greater place back in the Hitler days. It was quite annoying to listen to, so out of the blue asked them, in Norwegian, if they had already been to Sachsenhausen, the concentration camp closest to Berlin. I was met with an UHHM, not yet haha edit, grammar. I'll try to simplify this for non-poker players, but just know that 8s beat 7s. I was in Detroit and playing cards for a little higher stakes than I'm used to, and this obnoxious group of Lebanese guys come to throw their money around. They weren't good at all, just bet big and bluffed a lot. I took a stand with pocket 8s and ran into a flop of 410J rainbow. I called a big pre-flop raise of $50. 4 ways. And dude shoves all in for $450 more. Everyone fold around to me and I think for a bit. His friend asks what he has against the rules, in Arabic, against another rule, and he answers, Sabah Sabah, which means 7 to 7. I look up and say, call, and tell him, Sukran, thank you, in Arabic. I'm Asian, so it was obviously unexpected. The table erupts in laughter and he actually was a good sport about it. He got roasted by his friends for the rest of the night and most of the people there just ended up taking their money anyway. Edit. Yes, I still got jargon Y in the middle, but poker players always want context. No, the 7 didn't come, no flush, no straight. I learned Arabic living in Detroit and working in Dearborn Heights, the highest population density of Middle Eastern people outside of the Middle East. Also, I guess I could have kept taking advantage of knowing the language, but they were being magnanimous off the dealers already, so it was sweet justice. My old job, a couple of Mexican dudes came in with a fuel injector, but they didn't know what it was called in English or Spanish. I asked them what it was for, as in what car it was for, and they looked at each other and spoke in Spanish saying, this little black kid doesn't know anything about cars, damn it. Ask him if he can speak to a manager, to which I promptly replied to them in a Spanish, I'm the manager and I was asking what car is it for. Then back to English I said, that's called a fuel injector sir, and they were like all surprised and trying to be charmy with me. I gave them that nice smug, you, smile back. 2 deaf people were in my store talking, signing on me. My sister is deaf. I know ASL. After I got their money, I kindly told them to get the out and ended the conversation with the one sign everyone knows. My dad is the whitest white dude. Like British royal family levels of whiteness. But he was an exchange student in Bogota and fluent in Spanish. Dad, sister and I, and our aunt and uncle were all at the Mexican restaurant near our house. Everything was fine until we got the bill. Dad got this look on his face and stomped over to the cash register and had a quiet but intense Spanish conversation with the cashier, not sure of the details. But there had been some extra gringo taxes added to our bill, and apparently we ended up with a significant discount after he called him on it. Was still one of our favorite places to eat. Sad to see it close a couple years ago. I am a Canadian Aboriginal. When I was 18, I spent the year in Germany. This was due to the fact that from age 3, I was raised by a German immigrant family, and thus picked up the language and culture at an early age. During my time in Germany, I got a job working at McDonald's. As usual, I started on the fry machine, worked up to the grill, and then someone realized that as a Canadian, I am fluent in English. They then put me on the front till, as there is no end to the Americans that frequent McDonald's when overseas. American customers would come to my till, and in a loud, exaggerated and slow voice, with giant hand movements, would lean toward me shouting, I would like a BIIIGMAAAC and a large fries. I would punch their order into the till, and respond with, oh okay, why? Are you eating it here? Or will you be taking it with you? At least a dozen jaw drops per shift from astonished Americans. Edit. Thank you so much for the silver. Kind stranger. To answer how I know that they were Americans. Once I spoke English. The follow-up question was always, "What state are y'all from?" Quote, "I'm a French-American living in Orlando. One time I was in line at Disney and me and my friends were placing orders. But they kept saying they were out of what we were ordering." In perfect English, mind you. We end up looking at the menu for a little bit and placing another order. Done. Parisian guy behind us says in French, "I don't think these dumbass could take any longer if they wanted to." So I abruptly turn around in perfect French, let him know it was pretty unfortunate that we were all prepared but they ran out of what we wanted, so we had to take a while to find something different to eat, and that he shouldn't talk like that in front of his daughter. Probably 8 to 10. He just looked shocked and we left. As we were eating, this ball-lacking douche sends over his daughter to tell us he's sorry and that he didn't realize that they were out of what we wanted. Obviously not her fault, so we were okay with her. But what kind of sack of sends his daughter to apologize for him? To a group of teens no less, lol. I'm an American dude with long blonde hair, so literally no one ever expects me to speak Spanish. I catch people talking about me often enough, but it's usually not very exciting. However, one time I was getting a pretzel with a friend of mine, and the two women rolling the pretzels started talking about us as soon as we walked up. It was obvious we couldn't understand them because we were close enough to very easily hear every word. The conversation went something like, "Hey, check out this guy who walked up. He's so handsome, the tall one with the beard." Quote, "My friend. Ooh, no, the big one. I love his hair." I just kind of ordered my pretzel and tried not to laugh before walking away. I really didn't know whether or not to make it obvious that I could understand them. I just took the confidence boost and left out the "ooh gross" part when I told my friend about it. After. Deleted. My mum, not me. Mum is the manager of a Gap clothing store. Girl is on the phone speaking another language, saying she is about to run out with her 2 bags filled of merchandise that she had hid. And to pick her up promptly at the exit, Mum turns and says in the language something like, "You'd better just run. I have you on camera." Girl runs. The 90s were much cooler to work in retail. When I was in Romania as a Hungarian, I went to buy some food in a small town. I didn't know people in the restaurant were ethnic Hungarians. So when I asked for my food in English, the guy shouted, "A burger for this F***CKER" in Hungarian to the kitchen. I was curious how it would end, so I pretended I didn't understand. When he got me my food and asked for double the price, I said, now in Hungarian, "Look, dude, you can give me that for normal price, or I'm leaving it. But I sure as hell ain't coming back to you MFS ever again." Edit. Thank you for the silver. Fellow Reddit user. My best friend is Vietnamese but apparently looks Chinese, and most nail places are run by Vietnamese. Whenever we go, she texts me what they're saying if it's something funny or interesting. We went to one for mani pedis, never been before. We looked through the menu and told the woman what kind of pedicure we want, what scent and specials we want, and also ordered a GL of wine each. The manager walks by a while later and talks in Vietnamese to the ladies that were finishing up our pedicures. My friend starts texting me that he is freaking out because we were served alcohol and nobody checked IDs. He's saying that there is no way we could be of legal age and he could get fined. He called us baby faces and said we were high schoolers. I was celebrating my 27th birthday with my 26-year-old friend. The conversation went on awkwardly, back and forth as they tried to figure out what to do. Finally, just before going back for my manicure, my lady asked for my ID and looked relieved. Whoopsie. I was a Mexican living in Germany with a Chinese school-lined roommate. He claimed to not speak any English and my German wasn't good, so we weren't able to communicate. My German roommates then claimed he told them he didn't speak any German. So I gather he was antisocial. I took 3 years of Mandarin in high school, but I didn't try using it on him, monsieur. About 3 months in, he and another Chinese student got off the bus at the same stop I did and we all walked together to our flat. Heard him talking about me and his friend laughing but held back once we got to our flat. I opened the door and told them to please enter in Chinese. I still remember his shocked face. His friend later complimented my Chinese. While a few weeks later my roommate claimed my Chinese was so bad that he couldn't understand me. I seriously think he just wanted no contact with me. Possibly because he never followed the cleaning schedule. Here in India, I was in a lift, and there were two women inside. Later, an African man stepped in. The two women started making fun of his skin color and his country. In Hindi, they exited at the next floor. A moment later, the guy started talking to me in Hindi. He said he has been living in India for 5 years, and is a diplomat. He said that people say this in many places where he goes. I took 5 years of French in school, then went on a trip to France a while back. Some woman was talking about me in French at a restaurant after she'd heard me attempting to order by sounding out stuff on the menu. I'm not great at understanding French, but I could make out things like stupid American and stuff. I don't think she had a favorable view of Americans. I'm born to Russian immigrants. Whenever my family and I travel abroad, we almost exclusively speak Russian and tend to get better attitudes from people when they don't think we're American tourists. When I was 12 or so, we were in a cafe in Belgium and a large group of 20-something guys walk in. My dad gets a worried look on his face, drops his voice and says, "We are Americans right now." He explained to me later that they were Chechen gang members. At the time when Chechnya was at war with Russia and anti-Russian sentiments were extremely high. I'm half French, half Irish. Lived in France most of my life and went to the fan zone for the game. France vs Ireland Euro 2016. Was wearing my Irish scarf. I also look Irish. France won, and at the end of the game a French taunts me with terrible English, saying something like, "Aha, loser." I just answered in French, I'm French, dude." The look of stupidity and confusion on his face. Priceless. Native English speakers studying Japanese here. Before I moved to Japan, I used to work at my hometown's international supermarket. The Japanese customers that I noticed, anyways, were usually very nice. And one time there was a younger woman who brought in, presumably, her child, and the child said she was hungry and wanted ramune candy. I didn't want him to feel like I was eavesdropping, so after I rang him up I motioned to some ramune candies we had on sale that day, which I had placed on my register. Tried to make it seem nonchalant, and the woman decided to chip in and get some. And hey, the kid was happy, so I was happy too. Edit. Thanks for gold and silver. I'm glad a lot of people could also enjoy this memory. Posted this before, long ago. Flemish guy here, working as safari guide in Kruger area, South Africa. One time, my boss asks me to go pick a family of 4 up at the Klasery Reserve Gate. They're an afternoon game drive with them, and drop them off again afterwards. This was very uncommon. Normally we only do game drives with people that book room in our own lodge on the reserve, so I pick 'em up, introduce myself and go over the rules. All in English. They reply in English, or at least, the dad does, and normally I can pick up straight away if it's someone from France, Belgium, Holland or Germany, but his English was Oxford English. So I thought, English people. Off we went. 0.10 minutes into the game drive I hear them speak in Flemish. And not only that, in my own dialect. Side note, every Flemish town has a dialect. We can hear what region, province other Flemish people are from. And if from the same region, we can often even pinpoint the exact little town or community they are from. As I was going to have fun with these folks. Found a few nice animal sightings. Spoke English all the time, but then one sentence to the next, switched to their exact dialect. I thought, now they're going to be surprised. But nope. We all kept chatting in Flemish now. Only 20 minutes later, the daughter, maybe 10 years old, goes, "Wait a minute. He speaks Flemish." After all had a good laugh. I asked them where they were from. They literally live 1 street away from me. It's a small world, folks. I've shared this on Reddit before. I was in line at Disneyland, California with a group of Japanese teenage tourists were ahead of me in line. I speak Japanese, so I could understand that they were making fun of Americans. They were mostly saying things to the effect of, "On TV, they seem so cool. But all of these Americans are so fat and ugly." They were laughing and even occasionally pointing at people. I was just staying quiet, but then one of the cast members, who evidently also spoke Japanese, walked up to them and told them in perfect Japanese, "You guys should really be careful. Most Americans can speak Japanese." They all froze up and looked around at people, many of whom were giving them dirty looks. I nodded at them like I was backing him up, and they were horrified. They all left the line promptly afterward. Kind of a different story. But I was in Paris on a boat tour of the Seine with my host sister, and I said to her in French, "American tourists are some of the worst behaved," as a group of American teenagers next to us were using some pretty profane language. And loudly, too. What looks like the ringleader turns to me and in if heavily accented French, says, "I understand what you said. That's rude." So I switch over to my native Texan accent and tell him, "Then you ought to behave yourself better. Yellow bother," and everybody around here, they shut the up. In Costa Rica, in a small town, and everyone thinks non-religious Jews be Hispanic. Rich girl is talking to her friends about some boarding school in LA she attends, and was talking to her friends in English because her parents don't understand it. She was probably 12 to 14 years old. Proceeds to have a long speech about all the S she sucked, and started yelling out to the song, "I like big butts" by Sir Mix-a-Lot to "I like big cocks." My wife looks at her and says, "The only cock you've seen is in a chicken coop." Quote. Embarred girl turns red and flees the scene. Me and another guy, let's call him Joe, were eating at my friend's house. My friend's family was there also, and they're all Hispanic and they speak Spanish and English. Now me and Joe look like two skinny white boys. And Joe didn't speak Spanish. But what everyone didn't know is that I do. Dinner was great. We were all talking and laughing. My friend's mum kept trying to feed us more, but at this point I'm so full. So I tell her, "No thank you, I'm full." When I said this, the mother looked at her husband, and in Spanish said, "Full? How can they be full already? They are so skinny." Naturally the family started laughing. And I, because I understood what she just said, I started laughing as well, leaving only Joe, who doesn't speak Spanish, with a very confused look on his face. While the mother noticed I was laughing and suddenly she got a little pale. I then said to her in perfect Spanish, "It's true I'm rather skinny, but your food was wonderful." Everyone stopped laughing in a few awkward moments as the mother realized what I just said in what language it was spoken in. Finally it clicked and she burst out saying in English, "Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. It was just a joke." Quote. She really did feel bad about it and apologized constantly for the rest of the time. I thought the whole thing was hilarious. I'm Belgian and speak 3 languages, Dutch, French and English. Went to an Italian restaurant and was speaking Dutch to my GF as we entered. I have to add to the story that this was in a village next to Brussels where language is a very sensitive matter, and #X200B. A waiter addressed me in poor Dutch, but I was flattered so I talked to him in Dutch as well. He didn't really make any sense and was obviously irritated about something. He turned around and blasted of some profanities in French towards his colleagues about me and my girlfriend. It came down to, "I don't understand what this hole and his whore are asking me in this whore language." Cursing in French is very fun, by the way. And #X200B. So I made a scene. Shouted in French that I understood what he just said in front of the whole restaurant. Called him a few names and we left the restaurant slamming the door. He was speechless and very embarrassed. Needless to say, I never went back there. My husband is a diplomat, and we were posted to Japan. Since for once we had more than a month's notice, I decided to learn some of the language. The thing is that Japan was, at the time, famous among diplomats for young women seeking foreign husbands, as the men were not what you'd call appealing culturally. After a few weeks there, I found myself walking behind a group of local employees of the MB, and they were discussing who they thought would be my husband and get the spousal visa. As we reached the front door, they stopped to continue their conversation. As I walked past, I said over my shoulder, in my very best, probably badly accented Japanese, "I don't think my husband is very interested in a second wife." There were red faces and much embarrassed giggling behind hands. But I managed to leave Tokyo with the same husband I arrived with. My American grandparents' first language was German, so they would speak it when they wanted to have a private conversation. They were on an elevator with a stranger, and my grandmother said, "That is the ugliest lady I have ever seen," in German. She forgot they were on vacation in Germany visiting relatives. I live in Australia but my ethnicity is Chin, little tribe inside of Burma, so I can speak and understand Burmese but I don't look like a typical Burmese person. This happened a few years ago when I was working as a cashier after school. A couple came to my checkout and the wife started making little snide comments in Burmese about how I'm packing their stuff wrong. The husband would smile and gently ask me to fix certain bags and I did so with no problems, but she kept complaining about every little thing. After the fourth or so comment, I asked her in Burmese to please let me know how she'd like me to pack her groceries. They both freeze and the husband turns to the wife and says, "See, this is why you don't talk about someone in our language." I guess this isn't exactly the question but it's still funny. My friend was sitting on a bus in Barcelona and was speaking Swedish with our friends thinking that nobody could understand him. He commented on a girl's large breasts sitting in front of him in Swedish, when she suddenly stood up and slapped him and said, "I'm Swedish, idiot." I am part of the Buddhist society in my school and usually we'd go to a small house where my friend's uncle, who is a monk, lives there for camps and so on. Once he told us all about how certain topics interest us just by using a language that one can understand. He spoke to us mainly in Chinese mixed with a few English and Malay. We're Malaysian. Even though I'm Chinese, I can't necessarily understand all those dialects in Chinese like Guangzhou, Hakka, Teochew etc. The only dialect I knew was Ho. One time I was in an airplane traveling to Europe. I am a big guy so when I moved get into my seat this Arab guy called me a fat MF in Arabic. Now I am from Uruguay but my parents are from Lebanon so I understood what he said. Later on the flight he took off his shoes when he fell asleep and I took one of them and hid them at the back of the airplane. When we landed the dude had no idea where his shoe was. And #X200B, never UME. People don't understand your language on an airplane. I'm not exactly multilingual, since I'm not fluent in Japanese but I speak it well enough to follow basic conversation. I did a cultural exchange type program over the summer and was in Japan for about a month. Some friends and I took a trip to Akihabara Electric Town and went to some arcades. We ended up winning a bunch of little stuffed animals. We couldn't keep them all so we were planning on giving them out to other people from the program. But on the train back I heard a little kid tell her mum, "Look, they have pom-pom-porin." I gave her the toy and she was thrilled. I was in Florence, Italy once with our CL. We walked around the city, took pictures and just looked at the nice architectures until we saw an older male with a rather ugly jacket. I told my killmates in Norwegian, "Look at that jacket, looks like a roadkill." He then turns around, yelling in Norwegian, "Yes, fuck yes, I fucking know, but who am I to choose what I want to wear?" Before he points at his girlfriend, I was so embarrassed, but it didn't seem like he got hard. I worked in the and a woman came in asking if she could visit so-and-so. The front desk person wasn't there and I looked in the computer for her. I didn't see the name and asked her to confirm the name. I checked every floor aside from the and nothing. Even checked the adult hospital I worked in peds, and nothing. I very kindly told her so-and-so was not there and she became livid. She insisted I had no idea what I was doing and I just kind of shrugged and said, "Okay." Then she got on her phone in Spanish and said, "This idiot is telling me so-and-so isn't here. Blah blah blah." Finally her demeanor changes and she's walking out. I say to her, in Spanish, "Guess I'm not an idiot after all. I'm guessing he's in a completely different hospital, huh?" And she was fuming, didn't say a word and left. For context, I'm a female in my 20s. Fairly tall, long, reddish blonde hair, and very white. I was in our local World Food Market, which mainly sells Chinese, Japanese, and Korean food, mainly because it was hot and I wanted some taiyaki, along with some other snacks. As I was perusing the Japanese sweets aisles, I overheard two girls, maybe 16 or so, talking in Japanese and giggling, nothing unusual until they also turned down the aisle I'm in. Start looking at the sweets. Conversation is translated. Girl 1, "Oh wow, her hair is so pretty, isn't it?" girl too, isn't it though? It looks natural too. She's a true American, don't you think? I didn't know Americans like Japanese sweets. G1, see, she's holding taiyaki too. A pretty American girl who likes taiyaki. Amazing what kind of people are in America. You know? G2, yeah, what kind of pocky should we get? Strawberry or chocolate? At this point, I go over to near where they're standing and pick up a box of strawberry pocky. Me. In Japanese. Pardon me, but the strawberry is the best. I think, isn't it? They look at each other, clearly very surprised, and I say little, Jane, later, and go to pay for my things. While hearing whisper shouts of she speak. I have another story, but this one is about my ex-girlfriend. She was fluent in English, Japanese, and Mandarin, but she looked like a typical white girl, so no one ever expected she was fluent in those languages. One Halloween, I went as Bender from Futurama. I made the entire costume using cardboard and silver spray paint. For the feet I didn't really know what to do, so I just duct taped a pair of boots I had. The next day I was too lazy and hungover to take the duct tape off. So when we went to brunch at the cafeteria, I just left them. My girlfriend and I were walking back to my dorm room, and we paired a couple of Chinese exchange students who said something to each other as we paired. When we got out of earshot, my girlfriend burst out laughing. She said they commented on my boots, which they thought were made entirely of duct tape, and how cool they were. I started laughing too, and then we started joking around about how funny it would be if we started to see all the exchange students walking around campus wearing shoes and boots made from duct tape. Here's a picture of me as Bender and a bunch of my friends that also went as Futurama characters. https://imgur.com/5qminkmuck.jpg. You can't see the boots there, and I'm sorry, but I don't have a picture of them. I was more focused on cool pictures of my costume than of boots I spent a minute duct taping. I told this story in another thread, but I am 100% Mexican. But I don't obviously look it, and even though Spanish is my first language, I speak English without an accent. Back in college I started this job as a delivery driver, cashier at this Japanese restaurant. My first day there I was being trained by someone that worked there who was around my age. Most of the kitchen was Mexican or from somewhere in South Central America where they spoke Spanish. As she's training me on the processes and teaching about the orders, I could hear comments from the back that were in the line of, "Oh, I bet they're gonna," and "they want each other." It was funny to me because it was a bunch of grown men gossiping like they were in high school. I didn't really get a chance to talk to them because I was so busy learning the ropes. So I stayed quiet about that. At the end of the day the owner asked me if I could drive the cooks back home since it was on my way. I agreed, and we all got in my car and I asked them in Spanish how to get to their place. They were all silent for a second and they all starting laughing and saying, "You speak Spanish? Well, why didn't you say so?" It was a light-hearted car ride and I enjoyed it in their company. We all became friends during my time working there, and I would often drive them home because I enjoyed talking with him outside of work. When I was 16 I had a German exchange student, but at the time I was really insecure about speaking German. Since they came to England it didn't matter too much because I was meant to be speaking English with her, but I kept telling her my German was terrible, which resulted in her speaking German to all her friends and them saying some pretty Thai stuff about my friends behind their backs. One of my close friends asked my student a kinda weird question about if the sausage stereotype was true, and she and her friend laughed and called my friend a lot of horrible stuff like crazy freak. My German speech was terrible, but my comprehension was immaculate, so I never said anything to the German students' faces. But when they left you'd better believe I outed them to everyone about the horrible they were saying. Once when I was about 15 I was walking into Walmart when these two Hispanic guys started saying sexually explicit things about me. I'm Cuban, mostly of Spanish descent, so my skin is very white. I felt gross but kept walking. Then suddenly my mom called my phone, and I looked at the two men directly as I answered and said, "Hola mami, ¿cómo estás?" And one of the dudes bolted out of the store as quickly as possible while the other just stood there with his jaw open. I feel their reactions were a bit extra lol, but I thought it was hilarious. I'm a Swede who studied German for 5 to 6 years. During this last summer I worked as a cashier at a place that had a lot of German tourists. Whenever someone pays by card, the display shows text in the language corresponding to the country where the person got the card. Whenever I saw it was in German, or heard the customers speaking in German, I would give them the change, or wish them a nice day in German. The faces they got were always priceless and satisfying. One time I even got into a conversation about the football game that was in the evening between Sweden and Switzerland. I have a story where I didn't know what they were saying, but I think it still applies here. My friends and I were in Thailand last winter and would always start the day off with either a back mage or a foot mage. Mages were only like $5 for an hour over there, so it wasn't a big deal to get one every day. None of us knew how to speak Thai, but we always had a sneaking suspicion that the ladies were making fun of us while they majored our feet. So one day while they were talking and all laughing about something, I casually said, "Hey, you know I can understand everything you're saying, right?" This was obviously complete bull, but the look on her face, I still remember it so clearly. This great mixture of shock and embarrassment that you only get the privilege of seeing a few times in your life. The best part was that she didn't speak English well enough to try and call me out on my bluff. She then said something in Thai to the other ladies giving us mages, and I got to witness a chain reaction of the same embarrassed face 3 more times in a row. To this day I have no idea what they were saying. I'm not multilingual, just a slight nerd that knows enough Japanese to realize the nurses in this medical trial I was trying to sign up for were completely freaked out that they couldn't get blood out of me. Japanese nurse 1, we just need to run some blood tests. Me, sure. JN1 patiently waits and is confused. Smiles. Me, smiles back. JN1 walks over to other nurse and begins talking in Japanese. What I'm doing wrong? I do not know. Blood isn't coming out. JN2 Japanese. Did you miss? JN1 Japanese. No, it is very clearly visible, the vein. Sure of it. Both look over at me. Smiles. Me, smiles back nervously. JN2 English. Hi, I'm just going to move this and try again. JN2 proceeds to change the entire setup and tries again in new spot. Nothing. JN2 Japanese. What's wrong with this? JN1 Japanese. So little coming out. J2 Japanese. We keep stabbing. We should stop. Both look at me and smile. Me, nervous smile back. Both walk over to the head nurse in a storm of Japanese that was very difficult to follow. All 3 look over at me. Smile. Me, they have no idea I can understand them. JN3, JN2, and JN1 all walk over to me. JN3, sorry. Just one moment. JN3 pulls needle out of my arm and my blood high pressure sprays across the room and across all 3 of them. Monsieur, I can actually say I've made 3 Japanese nurses scream. Monsieur, I'm glad they were not insulting, even when thinking I couldn't understand most of what they were saying. The problem was dehydration, by the way. 15 minutes and a few cups of water and I was good. So my brother is an ESL teacher, and after you went to Korea to teach. He spent 3 years there, and 1 year I decided to visit from Canada. He and I both speak French and English. He also was taking Korean while there. We went to Japan for a week before returning to Korea, and while there we went to a small bar in Tokyo with a translator that we had hired. It was New Year's and everyone was talking and festive. A few people spoke English, so we stuck to them and had our translator do the Japanese. Well, my brother overhears someone speaking Korean, and leans over to me and says, "Pretty sure they're talking about us over there," so he goes off and starts chatting with them. So I'm all by myself as the translator went off to the washroom. A woman we had been speaking to through our translator looked to be only half Japanese. A white friend of hers came over, and all of a sudden I hear, "Say dommage je ne peux le parler. Que passe un traducteur?" I was thrilled. So now I'm chatting with him in French. My brother is off speaking Korean to the best of his ability. I've got a side convo going on with some English-speaking Japanese guys, and our translator is going seamlessly from English to Japanese. It was a very confusing and incredible experience. I was born and raised in Quebec. I have always had a better understanding of French than speaking it or writing it. I can usually respond faster in English, anyway. Often throughout my life I'd encounter people trash-talking me for being an Anglophone in French. When I can hear them clearly, I honestly just ignored it and got used to it sadly. I mean, I've had people straight up tell me to my face that I should leave the province because I'm a Anglophone and I am not wanted there. As a kid I even had a group, 4 or 5, of French kids chase me because they wanted to beat up an English kid. Quebec and Montreal are still beautiful places worth visiting, and I haven't had a negative experience in maybe 5 years or so. And work at an office where I only use English, international clients, so it's not all bad. But I am moving out of the country soon. I was about to do a bungee jump in Russia. I suppose I could end there. One of the workers says to the other, I can't work out how